we have a wonderful panel today where we're talking about scaling and investing in ReFi. So I'm going to turn it over to each of them in order, starting with Ian here to give quick introductions, and then we'll dive into the discussion. Ian.
Hi, everyone. Name's Ian. Work partner at McKinsey & Company. I lead our crypto efforts in North America and work a lot with traditional institutions, helping them marry the climate problem with the Web3 promise.
Hey folks, 1, 2, 3, da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Hey folks, my name is Philip. I am a partner at Crane Earth, and ReFi is basically what I live and breathe every day. I've been building in the DeFi space for a while, and bringing kind of the operator, builder perspective and turned into a seat to the table.
Hi everybody, I'm Alex, founding co-general partner of Verda Ventures, a ReFi-focused growth stage venture accelerator.
Hey everyone, my name is Mary at General Catalyst. I sit on our crypto team. We've, I think, invested a fair amount in ReFi. For example, we're seed investors in Celo, Series A investors in Flowcarbon, and have otherwise invested in the climate market, such as being seed investors in ecology.
So the first thing that we want to talk about is the climate space in general is very broad, and something that I'd like to hone in on is specifically where you think Web3 fits in the overall investing stack. Mary, I'd love to start with you if possible for thoughts on that and kind of what Web3 might leverage or things it can bring to bear that other sectors perhaps can't.
So, when we talk about climate, there's obviously lots to it. So there's offsetting, there's sequestering, there's transportation, etc. And when people ask why blockchain, which by the way I think is a phenomenal question, one of my responses is often why not? And I don't mean that in terms of randomly applying blockchain, but thinking about what are the ends that we're trying to achieve and what are the qualities of those ends, and is blockchain a good fit? So for example, when we're talking about the carbon market, some of the ends that we're trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve transparency, traceability, we're trying to achieve liquidity, we're trying to have ease of use, and hopefully based on those ends you can see that blockchain is very applicable here. And so I think based on those qualities, that's a good example of Web3 is actually where Web3 is a good fit for climate investing.
Alex, do you have any other follow-up thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah. Building off Mary's point, we see blockchain as the optimal base layer to the climate tech stack to bring liquidity, transparency, and auditability to an otherwise opaque status quo. So that's kind of where we see Web3 playing an important role going forward in the climate tech stack.
Ian, at McKinsey you deal a lot with large corporations who might be interested, they want to do something, they don't know what to do, they don't know how Web3 might fit in. How do you broach those subjects with them?
It's a great question. So fully agree with what has been said. A lot of corporations are just incredibly frustrated, to be honest, that they can't make bigger impact into the climate problem because I think it's been mentioned before, there's a real issue of trust, right? The amount of commitments that people have made publicly about wanting to do something about climate, I don't know what the latest number is, but it is very, very, very high. If you then look at how much money is actually being spent, it's not as much as it needs to be, and most corporations are getting frustrated because they made these public commitments, but they're unwilling to make investments into stuff through which they kind of like, I don't really know what I'm buying. Has it been double spent or not? Is this just, voluntary offsets from a Chinese gas plant? Less exciting. I want to be investing in North American forestry, but there's a complete lack of trust and a lack of clarity into the ecosystem that a lot of corporates are incredibly frustrated by. Unfortunately, I think someone also said it on the panel, there is a lack of trust in Web3 and crypto too. But at least people understand the basic concepts of, hey, blockchain is something interesting. People typically don't like crypto, but they do like blockchain. Still, that kind of that vibe is there. And so when you tell them, hey, blockchain can actually solve a lot of the underlying trust issues as it relates to trading, et cetera, at least once an asset has made its way onto that blockchain infrastructure. If you frame it it that way, then people are like, oh, okay, I guess I kind of get it. It solves some of the fragmentation. It can solve some of the liquidity. It's an interoperable base layer. So they get the concept very quickly, but then once you start heading into the implementation and how this stuff is actually supposed to work, that's where a lot of them will need a lot of help, and where we will typically get involved is really helping them onboard and understand these Web3 concepts and technology, because there's just a lack of understanding more broadly. So I'd say we do a lot of education, helping calibrate the promise of Web3 and also calibrate the timescales. But I'm very positive and hopeful, quite frankly. One, corporations tend to get it, and they really want to be part of the movement. And increasingly, I'd say a lot of them see Web3 as part of that answer.
So I'm glad you brought up some of the criticisms that corporations are concerned with, because I think this is something that people in general need to face head on. The Guardian had an article that highlighted a number of criticisms with the current voluntary carbon market, and it I think highlighted a lot of perhaps opportunities for entrepreneurs who are looking to solve some of these problems. Philip, do you have any takes or thoughts or ideas on potential opportunities moving forward based off of some of those criticisms of the current status quo?
Yeah. So I think one thing even with blockchain that we can't solve is if there's crap data in, like the stuff is still not going to be. I'm just going to hold this up a little bit. This is much better. One thing I was saying is crap data in still means crap credits on chain. So I think there's a lot that can be done to really get the right data in a verifiable way. There's some protocols who are doing this also in a decentralized way. And then I think as an entrepreneur, I'm also thinking at this moment in time where we can design financial systems like fresh, what we're doing in DeFi for quite a while now, and how can we bake in regeneration basically from the get-go in these new systems that we're building, so that the money can, of course, come and be used from the corporate side, the system can be used from the corporate, but also how can we then trickle it down to the folks on the ground and really basically design systems that have this regenerational loop from baked in. And I think that is something that I'm super excited about beyond just carbon markets, even though there's a lot of demand for that because we need to hit net zero goals, etc., etc. But there's a much broader playing field also when we look at circular economy or just supply chain in general.
Alex, do you have other thoughts on potential opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, we're most excited about bringing the offline real world on-chain, and so tokenizing real-world assets. Carbon credits obviously gets the spotlight, but beyond carbon credits, we see an opportunity for all sorts of tokenization, including, for example, plastics, plastic recovery, which is a massive problem, pervading our ocean and the food everybody is eating. So really what I'm most excited about is how do we bring that offline on-chain and improve upon the status quo to leverage the benefits of this new tech stack.
Something that we think a lot about at A16Z is scale, especially when we're investing. We're interested in things that we think can scale, quite extensively. And I'm curious from you all, what do you think needs to happen for ReFi to scale? Is it addressing a number of these criticisms? Is it bringing on board major corporations? Could it be grassroots first with perhaps retail customers versus corporates? What do you all think? Mary, we can start with you.
Sure. Can I first respond to the Guardian article point? So just to summarize what the Guardian article said, the headline was essentially that 90% of carbon offsets more or less didn't do anything, and they had a couple studies that showed that a lot of these offsets were going to happen anyway, so there was double counting, etc. And then the way that Verra, which is a large carbon registry, responded to that was saying that the methodology they used for those studies is different than the methodology that Verra used, and there's a reason for that. So I think the opportunity that brings up is that there needs to be a lot of cooperation between NGOs, governments, private corporations to decide upon a methodology before we bring that data onto the blockchain, because as you said, garbage in is not going to be very helpful. From there, I think there's a lot of private company opportunities to bring that data in a real-time manner onto a scalable platform like blockchain. So, okay, that was my first response. What was your second question?
Scaling.
Oh, scaling. I actually think corporations are a really important tailwind for this market. So for example, something we think about, which is something we thought about with our Flowcarbon investment, for example, is that there are so many large corporations that have made these net zero promises, and what you'll find as we head towards those promises having to be made is that there's going to be a gap between the emissions that they can reasonably reduce and what they say they actually want to reach, and most of that gap is going to be filled by voluntary carbon markets. So we think that's a huge tailwind for the market, and honestly, you need buy-in from all those shareholders, particularly these large shareholders, and as you said, a really important factor for them is educating why this is better objectively in a in a way that's not talking about the technology, but in a way that's talking about the outcomes.
Do we need to back in the technology?
What do you mean by that?
Do we need to not de-emphasize, but perhaps use crypto rails to do things that we want to do, but not necessarily force large corporates or retail consumers or others to have to worry about any of that? Does anyone? Go ahead.
I personally think so. We've helped clients actually tokenize, a couple 100 million of carbon credits onto a blockchain. If you go with a platform that they developed, if you go to their website, I don't think they mention blockchain anywhere. In fact, whenever they then go out to the market and tell corporations, hey, by the way, this runs on blockchain, a lot of them are like, oh, I don't know about that. But if they're like, hey, you can have this token, and anytime you want to trade it at any type of venue, like it's set up in an interoperable way, it's actually going to help your liquidity, should you so want to. Or if you ever want to retire them, you can have an auditable proof that you actually did based on our underlying platform. Then people are like, oh, now that's interesting. So I do think, ultimately you should focus on the value proposition that this stuff can provide. If you can do that on a Web3 tech stack and blockchains, even better, but it shouldn't necessarily have to point that way. And quite frankly, unfortunately, given the regulatory environment in the US right now, a lot of corporations are even prohibited from holding assets on balance sheet that run on a blockchain. Whether that's a public one, a private one, it doesn't even matter, right? A bank cannot hold a digital asset, even if it is a tokenized carbon credit. So I think if we want to be serious about scaling this stuff, you're going to have to bet on multiple rails, because otherwise you're just not going to get there, given all the complicating factors that exist.
I want to add something to that, is that I fully agree we need to get corporates or traditional players on board. And what I want to encourage folks here in the room who are building, and the folks I'm talking to a lot, they have a big heart, they know the tech, they know tokenomics, but they just haven't made this gap of we need to bring these large forces with us. Like if we build too much of a gap and innovate on the technology, then maybe they're not able to hold the tokens, or maybe they would have to stake some kind of token in order to receive carbon credits, which they're not going to do. So I think it's also for us, here, in order to scale this, develop a different consciousness of what a go-to-market actually looks like to get to the scale that we want to get to.
Yeah, in my mind, there are three large areas that are unlocked for scaling ReFi. Number one is regulatory clarity and support. If there is no regulatory clarity or enablement, institutions aren't going to adopt, period. The second area I would say is precisely institutional adoption. And I think firms like McKinsey play a very important role in brokering some of that change and have a very great opportunity to push the frontier forward. And then the third thing I would say is just around usability. The truth is, blockchain is still not accessible for most people, and the end state, which was alluded to earlier, should really be that we don't know we're using blockchain. Similar to, people don't need to know what tech stack is underlying the emails that they're sending and receiving. When we get to that point, I think we're starting to reach success. I do see a lot of interesting innovations happening. Also on the retail side, like being able, Eco Sapiens is one example. You're able to purchase an NFT that's equivalent to 1 year of carbon offset. And so I think that accessibility to retail audiences in addition to institutions is going to be an important unlock for usability that will ultimately be a prerequisite for scaling ReFi.
Let's talk about NFTs for a second. We're going a little off script here, but I think it's important because we think NFTs are going to be a total game changer. And it's interesting because a carbon credit right now is kind of just a number or a thing on a piece of paper. When you add a graphical element to it, or an element that can be kind of digitally possessed or in some way, shape, or form represents something visceral to people, it's very interesting how folks react much differently. And I think this is something that's been underexplored, how you can attach new visuals, graphics, there's probably a better word for it, to something that otherwise is just kind of a boring thing in a spreadsheet. And people get very excited about this. So I'm going to turn it over to you all, whoever would like to speak first, on thoughts here, and if this is something that could take the ReFi space forward in a new and interesting way.
I would love to say something to that. This emotional piece, like even the chief sustainability officer of a large corporate is still a person, right? And they're going to have an emotional attachment to saving this planet. So I think it's super important, and also to sway just the public, the general public, like bringing them on board as well. And then, as a very clear example, and that's why I wanted to say, is I was just standing with the folks of OFP there, and one of their validators just uploaded a picture of a sapling, and just turned this, some MRV data, blah, 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 into, wow, there's a little plant growing, and it's actually fucking cute. And so it really made, even for me, as an impact just looking at it. So I would totally say the emotional component is important. However, ultimately, we're dealing with large numbers, so we can try to marry them in some way, but we have both.
So I have a couple thoughts on this. The first is, so when I was an early engineer at Jora, which is another carbon offsetting app, one of the things we talked about, which I think could really apply to NFTs, is as you are offsetting, you could have some digital asset or some digital world that changes depending on like real-time data that's happening with your carbon offset. I think it's a great way, as you said, graphically and visually and emotionally, to get a mainstream audience to understand the impact that they're having. I think that's actually been a challenge so far with carbon offsets, or any problem that feels far away, is how do you actually viscerally understand that it's something here. And then a second point just about the NFT market generally. So I was looking at data about this the other day. Don't quote me on this, but read my newsletter TLDR, where I did fact check this. So while the NFT market by volume is down 80% since peak, it's still up 77x since January 2020. In other words, it's actually a very resilient market, and I think the user base is somewhat of a different base from some of the other markets in crypto, such as DeFi, etc. And so I think that really speaks to the resiliency and the growing popularity of NFTs.
I think so. I couldn't agree more with the concept of trying to introduce NFTs. I think you can start to do really interesting things, right? An NFT, as was mentioned, you can all of a sudden visualize something and you get an emotional connection to something, right? Trying to explore that on the climate theme, big opportunity. You can turn them into a programmable asset, right? Maybe you want to put some conditions on the fact of when can they be moved. Let's say that you have a carbon credit and that actually needs to be sold or transferred to someone else. Can you do a third-party API call to a satellite provider to say, is this forest still there, right? Pretty much a no-brainer in my opinion, but that's the type of programmability that you can do with, and we can do with tokens, but you can definitely also do with NFTs. And then the last bit is NFTs so far have found giant product market fit in a social, just a social setting, right? A lot of them are in essence social clubs. And if you look at how people get riled up about the climate theme, yeah, 100%, there must be something there. I'll give you a funny anecdote. Literally this week I spoke to a client who had reached out wanting to chat about, Web3 and climate, and this is a company that right now is developing, I kid you not, $3 billion plus of capital expenditure structures to build out renewable credits and renewable assets. And this person comes on the call and he's like, so you have to promise me not to laugh at me, but I last month discovered about the Bored Ape Yacht Club, and in the beginning I thought, who the hell is paying for these things? But I just didn't get it. And now finally it clicked, and I'm like, oh my God, these are just social tokens. These are social clubs. And now this person wants to tap into that use case, not the Bored Ape Yacht Club per se, but they finally understand, oh my God, this is a tokenized community. How can I apply that to the climate theme that obviously has a huge, huge following? So even some of the really legacy businesses and 50 to 60-year-olds that are not very familiar with Bored Ape Yacht Clubs, the moment it clicks to them, it starts to really mean something to them, and then exploring the concept of NFTs for these guys is something that we're going to work on.
There's a dynamism to digital assets, I think, and the programmability piece gets us very excited because you can do net new things that you just couldn't do before. So you can have carbon credits that evolve over time if the NFT evolves. There's a million different things you can do that we're not even thinking about now. And so anytime we see kind of a blank canvas of programmability, it's something we get very, very excited about. And I think there's a very interesting intersection there that we'll probably see play out a bit more the next couple of years.
I would love to just do a quick shout out because this kind of social club exists and it's called ReFi DAO, where this token. Yeah, exactly. So just like pointing even these corporates to existing models might be something to explore. 100%. Yeah.
100%.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left here, so I wanted to cover the future as well. And I'd like to hear kind of what everyone's most excited about, and maybe some ideas that might now sound a little off the wall or might be flying under the radar that you all think could make a big impact in the coming years in the ReFi space. So I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if someone would like to lead, feel free.
I guess
That's an amazing answer to this question.
Mary always picks on me, and I don't know why. I mean, as I think about the future, people in general overestimate what can be done in a year and underestimate what can be done in 10 years. And I think a lot of the potential things we're talking about will not be fully formed 1 year from now. But over the next 10 years, I'm very excited about programmability and tokenization of these real-world concepts. To date, in my opinion, like a lot of crypto looks like an incestuous casino, and that has limited impact, limited scale, and limited positive influence on people's lives. So although it's going to take a long time and it's not going to move as fast as something that is purely digital closed loop casino, I think over the next 10 years we have a chance to fundamentally impact people's lives and community and the environment, and that offline to on-chain, although it'll take slower than many of us hope it would take, will be a fundamental change to how we live our lives, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Just really quick on that point, Alex. What's the key barrier? Is it kind of the hardware to software piece where you're having to find and take real-world data and convert on-chain via some sort of trusted Oracle or decentralized Oracle, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm going to sound really old right now, but I started mining Bitcoin back in 2013, and like the stuff that I thought would take like a year has taken like 10 years. And like, as one example, like looking at stable coins, like MoneyGram really shouldn't have a business right now. Like you can send money anywhere in the world with your mobile phone, only knowing their phone number for a fraction of a penny. But nevertheless, Western Union, MoneyGram can charge, teen percentage points. And I think it's just an adoption curve. It's getting people comfortable. It is an educational journey. And like it's kind of frustrating for me because I feel like a lot of us see where the puck should be, but getting there just is excruciatingly slow. And I think it revolves around us as active contributors and leaders in this space, taking more time to educate and to frame the message in a way that is digestible to a more mainstream community. So I think the biggest unlock is education. Is understanding that, hey, this is not just, FTX does not mean like crypto. FTX was a centralized traditional finance organization, and like until we get to that level of nuance, like people are going to have barriers up to being willing to adopt and use this technology. So if I boil all of it down to one word, it would be education is the primary barrier to us getting to that impact and scale that many of us are envisioning now, but will unfortunately take up to 10 years in some cases. Stop picking on me.
I'm so sorry.
What are you most excited about?
Okay. I'm so sorry, Alex. Okay, now that you've given me the time to prepare an answer, I will give you a low level and a high level answer. So I think a more practical short to medium term answer is I'm also excited about just general asset tokenization. I think this is one of the first times in crypto where you'll have a mainstream population understand very easily where the underlying value comes from, because there is something that we've all agreed upon that already has value underneath. So for example, if you're investing in a carbon offset token, you know that if everything else is not going well, there is value in that underlying carbon offset. That's true if you tokenize a solar project or another renewable energy product, etc. I think it just allows a larger population to understand utility and tokens at the same time. And then I think from a high level perspective, when we think about the principles of ReFi, I think that ties very well with something we try to do a lot at GC, which is talk about and invest in responsible innovation, so much so that in our investing process, we actually have a section where we talk about how is this responsible innovation, and what we mean by that is considering the negative externalities of the business that we're investing in for the environment or for the world, and hopefully having net positive impact by creating a flywheel of positive impact. And I think that is very much tying in the principles of ReFi to what we do on an everyday basis for the decades to come.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The last thing I'll mention, and we're out of time here, is decentralized physical infrastructure networks are something that we're very interested in. There's some problems there with hardware, and you're dealing with very wired networks, the definition of wired, in fact, if you're dealing with electrical grids, but something else to kind of keep an eye on moving forward. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and look forward to lunch.